We just said good night, but for those of you who decided to hang on, we have a special bonus for you. Jacqueline Lawrence, Jake, is also passionate about poetry and is a poet. So she's agreed to share one of her poems with us right now. Enjoy.
Thanks, Grace. This is a piece that I wrote about 8 to 9 months after um, the Ghana summit, and it's called Voices. I sat in the center of the dark cell, its closed black iron cast door shutting out the midday sun. I sat on the cold dirt floor where freedom fighters fell one by one. Silence fed me memories. No room, no light, no oxygen. Only death lived in the skull marked room. And the voices echoed, "Forgive them, forgive them, forgive them." I walked outside to the main courtyard as the sun baked tear stained tracks on my cheeks, my eyes fastened on the church in the corner, its steeple reaching up to heaven and its foundation cemented in the dungeon's rooftop. It is a silent witness to chained humans waiting below in knee-deep wastes, fishing for food and inching through narrow, now whitewashed corridors, and the voices echoed, "Forgive them, forgive them, forgive them." Unsteady feet took me up the stairs to the second level courtyard where my sisters, my aunties, and my girl cousins were paraded for the Portuguese, Spanish, and British officers. The lottery picks to be betted for one night or more by one officer or more. No white knights to the rescue, no ministers or ministries lobbying against the sowing of unwelcome seeds in the wounds of many. And the voices echoed, "Forgive them, forgive them, forgive them." I shifted my feet towards the gate of no return, my heart pace quickened, matching the pounding of the Atlantic on the other side. My knees buckled as I slowly retraced the footsteps of hundreds of thousands, the footprints of millions. The gate opened and silence fed me memories, strangers with guns and no amazing grace, lashing the captured with whips and foreign tongues, corralling them into wave-tossed rocking boats, packing them as sardines in ocean-bound ships, transporting them as cargo afar and away from home. And the voices echoed, "Forgive them, forgive them, forgive them." In the hazy horizon, I saw the ships disappear, falling into the new world. I saw ocean waters rising up like arms, cradling bruised, lifeless bodies, hurled overboard to swim home, to stay home. And the voices echoed, "Remember me, remember me, remember me." I slowly walked back through the gate of return and stood beside the Empress and Afua, not knowing for how many I stood. Silence fed me gratitude. I whispered, "Thank you." And the voices replied, "I am at rest. I am at rest. I am at rest." So that is a piece that was written after Ghana. Um, and I was sharing with folks that what was so significant about that piece was while I was in Ghana, I couldn't write. My notebook came back empty because Ghana demanded all of my senses to be able to just capture the images and the experience of that trip. And specifically getting that declaration, "I am enough," certainly spearheaded me to continue. And the writing is certainly a part of that, where I think I became more fully self-expressed and willing to share, and having had the opportunity to be published in 3 anthologies and getting ready to do my first full feature collection coming out either the end of this year or early next year. So really excited about that. Um,
Thank you so much. Welcome to the International Black Summit interview podcast. This is the International Black Summits podcast where we interview current and past facilitators and participants of the International Black Summit in order to find out how they use the tools and distinctions of the summit in their lives, in their careers, in their families, in their communities, in all aspects of life. And tonight we're interviewing one of our current facilitators, Jacqueline Lawrence. We sometimes call her Jake. Really excited to have her with us tonight. My name is also Jacqueline Lawrence. My name is Jacqueline Grace Lawrence, and in the summit, I go by Grace. So we have the two Jacqueline Lawrences. We're both from Canada, and we are going to have a really interesting conversation with Jake tonight. Looking forward to it. So just a little bit about Jake. Just going to read a little bit about her bio, not her long one, it's a short one because she's done a lot. So if we read her full bio, it would take a while. So I'm just going to give you a taste, a flavor of who Jake is. So Jacqueline Lawrence lives in Ottawa, Canada, and she is currently the Diversity and Equity Coordinator for the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. She is the former policy advisor on diversity management at the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, also known as CMHC, a position that she held for 10 years. Before CMHC, she was a consultant specializing in labor market research, communications, and diversity strategies for public, private, and not-for-profit clients. She's also a former parliamentary assistant, speechwriter, executive director of the National Women's Reference Group on labor market issues here in Canada, and the Multicultural Women's Association executive director. Her passions include writing poetry, traveling, facilitating the International Black Summit, and serving as a co-host and producer of Black on Black, a community public affairs program on CHUO 89.1 FM in Ottawa. So welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so happy that you were able to be with us today.
Well,
Jake.
thank you. Jacqueline Lawrence times two. I love it. I love it.
So before we get into the nitty gritty of asking you a bunch of different questions, I want to ask if you would be willing to generate the declaration of the International Black Summit. For those of you listening or watching us on our YouTube channel, you may not be familiar with the declaration of the International Black Summit, which is something that is a foundational document and tenet for us. So if you could generate that as a way to really ground this conversation. So I'm going to.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Great, wonderful. So I'm just going to momentarily bring that up on screen. And here we go.
The Declaration of the International Black Summit. We declare ourselves, our community, and all communities whole and complete. There is nothing to do except be. We assert that we are responsible for generating community as possibility and distinction. We listen for and grant being to the possibility and creation of unpredictable results. Our conversation of, about, and for those of African descent is one of power, self-generation, abundance, responsibility, unity, and integrity with the possibility of being. We stand for the expression of our spirituality, ending the murders of our men, women, and children, building economies responsible for funding our community, maintaining wellness of being in our bodies, providing human services, establishing nurturing relationships, altering the conversation of who we are in the media, empowering our youth. We declare that our community manifests itself in the world as a contribution in the transformation of the universe. Atlanta, Georgia, October 7th, 1991. Today, which is June 4th, 2023, wherever people of Black African descent reside. A moment of silence, please. Mm.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you. Thank you. Did I cut your moment of silence short?
No, not at all. I was going into my meditation mode there for a minute. Perfect way to start.
I was wondering if you realized that our equipment might just cut out the silence anyway.
That's
It
okay.
might automatically cut the cut the silence out. So,
It's all good.
so welcome, welcome, welcome. My
Thank you, thank you,
namesake.
thank you.
So, we usually start by asking our guests how you first came into contact with the International Black Summit, like what your first exposure was, your first event, your first conversation, who
Mhm,
introduced you, all of that.
mhm.
What was your first exposure to the International Black Summit?
My first introduction, and I should say thank you for the invitation to be here, to be in conversation with you. My first introduction to the International Black Summit was the declaration of the International Black Summit.
Hmm.
My good friend and co-facilitator, fellow facilitator, Don Armstrong, received it from Trevor Wilson, and she shared it with me. And my first reaction, actually, I should say that the first time I read it, I read the first two lines about four times before I continued, because I just couldn't believe the power packed, um, how power packed those two lines were. We
Mm,
declare ourselves, our community, and all communities whole and complete. There's nothing to do except be. Oh my goodness, that just rang through. It just sent chills through my body when I read that, because that was such a counter. It was counter to so many of the negative stereotypes of who people of Black African descent are. And to begin with, we declare ourselves and all
right.
communities whole and complete, because that's notion that we're broken, we need to be fixed. I had to really wrap my head around that for, I would say, for a good 2 to 3 years. um,
So what year would have that have been when
that
Don
was
Armstrong
2001.
introduced
That was
you?
2001. And that, and when I read it, I didn't know. I think I got it about maybe about 2 months before the summit, and all I knew was that I had to be at the summit, because I was just like blown away that I didn't know Black people were having this type of conversation. And I've
Mm,
always been drawn to transformational conversations, but I've never had it with Black folks leading it, being in charge of it, and directing it based on our own lived experiences. And so that summit was, my first summit was in Memphis. Um, and, you know, it's one of these things that what I started to get present to was when you declare a thing. I didn't even know this is what this whole process was until I got there. When you declare a thing, things move in really expeditious ways, because of all the years that that possibility could have existed, it was one of the toughest years of my life. One of my aunts was diagnosed with cancer. We had brought her up from Jamaica for treatment. The medical bills were exorbitant beyond belief. And I was going, I live in Ottawa, but my family lives in Hamilton. So I was going home every weekend or every second weekend to support taking care of her. So there was nothing in the coffer to say, oh, I'm
mm,
going to go to
mm.
Memphis. But that declaration called me into that space. And it has been life changing.
So how did Don, I will mention for anybody listening, we have an interview, a podcast interview with Don Armstrong. And we also have one with Peter Trevor Wilson that you mentioned. So if anybody's interested in finding out more about both of those facilitators of the International Black Summit, please feel free to check out our other podcast episodes interviewing them. But interesting, you say that you received the declaration from Dawn about 2 months before that year's annual summit event. Did she just bring it up in conversation? Did she email it to you? Like what was?
Yeah, she had received it from Trevor, and then she was sharing with me because she thought it was so powerful. and she thought I would appreciate it. And it was correct on both sides. And so we started having the conversation about that declaration even before landing in the space of the summit. So just to start pulling it apart, teasing it apart, just having it resonate through my body. That's how I started my conversation with the summit.
And so based on that document and that introduction to the conversation as expressed in the document, it's so interesting that you started this session with generating the declaration,
Absolutely.
which isn't something we do every session. Sometimes we end with the declaration. Sometimes we haven't even had the declaration in the interview.
Mhm.
So it's so interesting that that naturally showed up for us in this episode.
Absolutely.
So you're introduced to it, you decide to go to Memphis. What do you find at the annual summit event in Memphis? What occurs for you there?
Oh my goodness. Black people, Black people, Black people.
I was
having
at
a,
that summit in Memphis. It was
having a
great.
transformational conversation. And I live in Canada, and at the time, I mean, 20 years ago, my goodness, can't believe it's 20 years now. 20 years ago, our population here was very small. Um,
In
and
Ottawa.
in Ottawa, yes.
Yeah.
And so to be in a space, I think at that summit, there were, good 200, 300 persons in that space. But it was the energy of the space that got me first. It was the energy, the welcome that was there, um, the the diversity within the space of Black folks. I mean, there were folks who were from, the continent, there are folks from the States, there are a couple of folks from the Caribbean, because even in my first small group, there were Miss Gums from Anguilla, a couple of folks from California, a couple of folks, one person from California, one person from the deep South, Mississippi, myself, and I forgot where the fifth person was from, but it was just so fascinating to me. Different socioeconomic backgrounds, diverse spiritual practices or religions, just such rich diversity that, different levels of awareness in terms of transformation. But it was all this incredible space, this energetic space that I'd never been in a space like that before. And what was so fascinating too was I was I was just breaking up with someone. And so that conversation that was generated about Black women and Black men was really quite powerful for me, because it spoke about how we honor each other, how we respect each other. And Trevor Trevor did a number on me, because I was just blown away, because I'd never really closed a relationship before. And it so happened that this person was going to be in Atlanta, and I was going to Atlanta afterwards. And Trevor sat down with me and just supported me. And of course, now I understand the distinctions, and just cleared with me as things had come up for me during that whole conversation. And then he said something to me I'll never forget. He goes, "You're going to have to tell him that you still love him." I said, "What? Are you crazy?" But it was one of the most healing things I ever did, was to leave a relationship with love versus leaving it with anger and angst and, things left unsaid. And so to have that opportunity when I got to Atlanta to do that, I mean, I don't think he realized how much that shifted how I complete relationships, just leaving it with everything intact, the person's dignity intact, my dignity intact, and just be okay with, I can honor you even if we're not together. And it's just been a beautiful space. But I have to say, one of my other memories of the space was, I'll be forever remembering Kenneth Young, one of our senior facilitators who made his transition, when he was demonstrating the distinctions bump up against by doing the bump on stage. And
Well, say a little bit about, you've already begun to talk about a couple of the distinctions, two or three
Mhm,
of the distinctions of the International Black Summit. Distinctions are words or terms that we use, typically just regular English words that we actually have a unique approach to, a unique
mhm,
way of distinguishing those terms, and a unique way of using those terms in order to move a conversation forward, or in order to break open something for
mhm,
ourselves or move ourselves forward. So you've talked about clearing, which is one of our distinctions. You've talked about completion, which is one of our distinctions. You've talked about bumping up against, which is one of the summit
mhm.
distinctions. So say a little bit about bumping up against.
Well, I remember, and I love the distinctions because those tools and technology have really supported me to not only the distinctions themselves, but our questions and the
Mhm.
declaration continues to give me access to explore and to excavate my life in ways that is beyond recognition right now. So bump up against when Kenny Young was demonstrating it, he gave the image of being in a room, and we know the layout of the room in terms of the furniture, etc. And yet, um, if we enter that same space in darkness, if someone has moved the furniture at some point, then we start bumping up against them. And if so, the path is not as clear as we originally thought it was. And I remember him doing that, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is what happens to me so many times in my life, where I bump up against things that I think I know, I thought I knew it, but something has shifted and I wasn't present to the shift that occurred. And so I
Mm,
started to just apply to different things in my life in terms of just being able to notice another distinction that we have.
another
Notice
distinction.
when things shift or change and how I navigate or move with them. Sometimes I may have to get myself reoriented to the new lighting that's in the space to be aware of them, or I just have to simply be able to make the necessary adjustment in other ways. So that distinction really shifted my ability to just be aware of um, things that I may be bumping up spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, so that I can then be able to clear a path to move forward.
Mm. So you said, thank you for that. So you said that there was, you've been using these distinctions in your life, that your life is, I don't recall the words that you used, but like your life is a new life, like undistinguishable.
Unrecognizable.
22 years now. I mean, we're talking 21,
20, yeah,
22
I
years
know.
ago.
I think it's like 5 versions of myself since then.
So, so take me through a couple of those versions, like who you were in 2021 versus who you are now, and how the tools and distinctions have helped you create and get to where you are and who you are now.
Well, in 2001, I would say that I was a very introverted. I used to think I was shy, but I've since discovered I'm more an introvert than shy. Um,
How would you, what's the difference to you between
the
introverted and
difference
shy?
with an introvert is just a keen observer, whereas someone is shy is kind of timid or afraid to approach people. I'm not afraid to approach people or speak in front of people, but I am reserved somewhat in terms of how I like to move in the world. I like to observe things and then step in, test it, that kind of thing. So it's kind of a my reflection. I like to think and reflect before I act. And a shy person hides more, and I have some tendencies for that, but I'm more on the introvert side than the shy side. So I was very introverted, and I was seeking approval, I would say, to be myself.
Mm,
I was, I grew up in a Caribbean household, traditional Caribbean household, where the good old rules were speak until you're spoken to, speak when you're spoken to, the good girl image and all of those things. And so some of them were not in alignment with my spirit, but I was following along because those were the rules. Um, but there were things that were just not, uh, they were just not me in some ways. So I'm a little bit conservative on some things, but I'm a little bit more liberal or expressive in certain ways. And so what I didn't know was how to express myself or how to access ways of expressing myself um, in a way that was truly from my own voice, let's say. And so what the summit gave me, just even that one-on-one conversation with Trevor, was to really give me access to myself, my own thoughts, my own feelings, and not just access it, but to honor it and to pay attention to it and then honor it. And so, from the get-go, just starting to use those particular techniques and the encouragement and the support to speak what's there for me, to start hearing my own voice and to be able to trust my voice was quite significant. And that, led not only to having conversations with persons in different ways, but it also led to me actually, I would say, coming out of the closet with my own poetry, because I've been a poet for many years, but it wasn't until we did a summit share in Ottawa that I actually kind of came and read out loud one of my poems. And so I was just taking these incremental steps to be fully self-expressed. Um, I think one of the most extraordinary summits for me, actually sometimes say, there was Jacqueline Lawrence before Ghana and then Jacqueline Lawrence after Ghana.
Mm.
And the
Now
reason
Ghana
for
was
that,
2004, I think. I think
pardon me?
Ghana was 2004.
Yes, 2004.
So 3 years
Um,
after your first summit.
yes,
Okay.
major change. Because that summit, when we came out of that summit with the declaration, I am enough, oh my
Mm.
goodness, it opened a whole floodgates of spaces that I would then trust my voice, trust the spaces that I entered in terms of what I had to say. I'm not saying that I was doing it afraid. I didn't say I wasn't scared, but I was doing it afraid rather than edit myself or stop myself from saying something. Um, and that summit in particular, it I would say the velocity of changes and transformation in my life shifted, because once I really started to anchor I am enough. And this is why that's so important, because I was never affirmed in terms of being beautiful or smart. So there were a lot of knots in my life, so to speak. I'm not enough, I'm not beautiful, I'm not um I'm not smart, I'm all these knots. I could go through a lot of them. But that expression of I am enough, or that declaration I am enough, completely shifted so many things internally for me.
So, you mentioned that out of that annual summit event, 2004, that there was a declaration out of that year. So each year, again, in the annual summit event,
Mhm.
we leave the annual summit event with an inquiry or a declaration for that coming year. And we engage in that inquiry as participants and as facilitators for over the course of that year until the next summit event, and we leave the next summit event with a new inquiry or engagement or declaration. So you mentioned that one. So I'm curious, are there other annual questions or annual inquiries that really were significant or noteworthy for you?
Um, oh my goodness, there's so many. I think every year has its own. It takes me through some work because I take notes, I work through them for the year. Um, I think it was in actually the Toronto summit. I'm going to go back a little bit. The second summit. um,
2002.
2002. That question was, what is available? Well, actually, let me talk about Memphis as the question, because that really triggered it. What is available by consciously owning all I create? Oh my goodness. I
That's a
have
good one.
never thought of, again, it's coming back to this declaration space, but when you now add the declaration of the International Black Summit combined with this question for me, what is available by consciously owning all I create, that I am the creator of my life, to be able to take ownership of that. It took me a couple of years to be fully present to that, but that started a ripple effect that continued with Toronto, which was what is available in noticing all that I create that keeps me unconscious to the wonder that I am. I'm telling you, this was just excavating, more and more of myself. And so you can see how the culmination, having worked through those kinds of questions, that when we got to Ghana in 2004, the I Am Declaration was just so powerful, because the before the I Am Enough Declaration, there was a statement in Ghana which was, I am complete on who I know myself to be. And that's why I say there's a before Ghana and there's an after Ghana. I declare that I am enough. And so each year has just taken me more and more, I would say, from looking outside to the world for validation, and then starting to look internally to give value to myself, and to be present to my own value and worth. Still a work in progress in many areas, but I've seen this impact my writing. It has impacted my career trajectory. It has impacted how I communicate in my relationships. It has impacted the risk that I take, because I used to be very timid about taking certain steps, and taking certain risks in life. And now I think I take calculated risks, but it has really shifted the trajectory of my life. And I think one of the other declarations, I can't remember what year it was, but be with what is, that played a number on me, because I think part of the conversations that generated that was, part of this thing about what you're thinking or how you hold something can be the very thing that holds you in a particular place of pain or suffering. And that woke me up, because there were so many things that were happening in my life at the time, in terms of things, again, that I needed to release, in terms of thoughts, in terms of beliefs that I've had. And so I was able to, again, sit inside of those questions, and declaration. These things don't happen overnight, but sticking with them over the years, they have certainly continued to support me, as I said, to be more introspective and internally driven versus being externally motivated.
It's interesting. You talk about some of those questions, declarations from the early 2000s, which is also around when I was introduced. The International Black Summit has been around since 1991, as stated in the declaration that you generated at the beginning of the episode. But my first summit was in 1999. Yours first summit was in 2001, and those first summits for me also had that same kind of major impact. I remember that one about conscious ownership. Consciously owning all that I create, and had me really look at how, up until that point in my life, tonight we are interviewing Jacqueline Lawrence, and I'm a Jacqueline Lawrence, so I'm jumping in here.
Jacqueline pie or square, it's all good.
And I remember thinking about how I had, up until that point in my life, living a life that had been driven by factors that were not always coming from me. and
Absolutely.
making choices that were not necessarily reflective of my own authentic desires.
Absolutely.
And then out of that, really looking to say, okay, this is my life. I get to create it how,
Exactly.
and I'm going to
Exactly.
consciously own that, even though I'm here now because I was following the influences of society
Hmm.
or family
Hmm.
or whatever it may be, to own that I stepped into that, like I didn't have to,
Absolutely.
right? So
Absolutely.
owning that, um
Absolutely.
so my one of my shifts was that I changed careers around
Hmm.
that time. I left the practice of law and went into something else. So all of what becomes available by really being able to take on and look at how we can use all of these different tools, the annual question, the declaration, the
Hmm.
distinctions, all of that, conscious ownership being another one of our distinctions.
And I think, Jackie, I think it's so critical what you're saying. And what I'm also trying to share with folks is this, that particularly again, if you look at the history of people of Black African descent, there has been this constant barrage of you can't, you don't know how, it's all negative. And to be able to find out that, I can take ownership of myself. And we've had so many people in history who've shown us that, including people in our own families who've shown us that. But when you get that message for yourself personally, and you start living your life through those particular lenses, and you start being able to set your own path, I don't, if that's not freedom, I don't know what freedom is.
It's interesting because it takes me back to the beginning of the declaration where it says
Hmm.
we declare ourselves, our
Hmm.
community, and all communities whole and complete. And like you said, it's a declaration. We're
Hmm.
not waiting for anybody else to
Mm-mm.
tell us that we're whole and complete.
Nope. Nope.
You can like, so it's no longer this seeking for the external validation,
Nope.
right, that some of us might do. I mean, it's a human thing, right,
It's a human
to
thing. But
to
especially when the validation is for me to be less than who I am,
exactly.
or when the accolades are for things of what someone else thinks I am, but not necessarily at the same level as they are. Oh no, I get to determine that. I get to decide that. I get to tap into the potential of the creator to create my own space, my own life, and to really listen for what purpose I'm here. And that's why I think, it's not just the sense of the declaration itself, but the fact that the International Black Summit exists such that the participants can bring into being their vision for themselves, the Black community of the world. That vision is so critical, because I think that gives us, this gives me that space that I can anchor and check in with myself in terms of what am I listening for, doing, being, in terms of, as I said, career, as relationships, all of these things. It has given me these amazing milestones and barometers to check in with myself to see, is this what my heart desires? Is this what's between my head and my heart, in terms of that, gives me joy, that I'm grateful for, that I'm at peace with? It's a totally different come from for me with that.
So let me ask you about your professional life,
Hmm.
and using these distinctions in your professional life. Like, I know we're both professional women in the Canadian context,
Hmm.
and we walk into rooms being the only
Oh.
Black person in the room all the time, right? Like all the time. And sometimes the only woman in the
Why
room
was I
all the
celebrating
time.
Black people, Black people, Black people?
Right? All the time. So I'd like to hear about your own experience of using these tools and how you use them as support for yourself as you move in the world and as you move in certain spaces, with grace and elegance and empowerment. So
Mhm.
what shows up for you in that realm?
Well, so when I was introduced to the summit, the International Black Summit, I was working at the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation as their policy advisor on diversity. And what was so interesting, this is a federal agency within the Canadian government. And so we had about 3 to 4,000 staff. And the program that I was leading was, to really get our employees aware, increase their awareness around diversity and equity specifically, so that we're able to serve all Canadians, including those who are racialized, Indigenous and racialized. And one of the things, particularly after I came back from Ghana, so I was there about 3 years before, no, what we went to Ghana in 2004. So I was there since 1998, whatever the math is on that.
That's 6 years. Okay.
And there was some struggles to get the process moving forward because, folks thought they were way ahead of the game than they were. But to really integrate equity and diversity and inclusion principles into the business of a federal department or federal agency proved to be more challenging because folks were a little bit resistance, let's say, and I would say even more fearful of not knowing what to do and fearful of not knowing how to do it right. So when I came back from Ghana, I noticed that I shifted in terms of how I heard people, because I don't think I really paid attention to the fear construct that was happening in the space. I was actually taking it as, oh, I'm not doing something right up to that point. And when I came back from Ghana, that whole thing about I am not enough expanded my view in terms of, well, if I have felt I'm not enough, do other people feel as though they're not enough with this diversity conversation? And so I started to design training in a different way. I started to really look at diversity, equity, and inclusion as a transformational tool. And so I began to design my training from an information base to a transformational base and make it more experiential. And so I would then invite people to be in a space and create a safe space for them to have those conversations that they are afraid to have with other people or even within their groups. And I began to coach people rather than just have them come into a space if they were not comfortable to come into the space. So I started using the distinctions like clearing, like noticing, like alignment. And it shifted the energy of the spaces because it wasn't a blaming of the historical wrongs that have happened to people of African descent, Black African descent. It was now about how do we collectively identify the issues and identify how this does not serve everyone. And particularly that year, again with Ghana, that preamble to it in terms of I release, what was it? It said, I am complete on who I know myself to be. I started inviting people to complete on practices that does not serve us, to complete on policies that do not serve us, and to really start revising and looking at things with a different lens, because at the time we had the tagline that we're serving all Canadians. And I started doing to show research that we were not reaching the full diversity of Canadian population. And so that just opened and expanded my eyes to that. And then that just led to me over the years becoming more intentional. And I would say now where I am with that work is still holding diversity, equity, and inclusion as a transformational tool. But now what I've done over the years is now become more conscious and be more intentional with it, be about systemic changes and systems changes and structural changes, and policies, procedures, practices, and behaviors, because now I work in the school system and recognizing that behaviors are one of the biggest barriers that particularly Indigenous and racialized students experience. And so it has evolved as I've evolved using these tools, my work has evolved. Um, and I said earlier that I was very timid when um, I was more of a, um, not timid, but
You said you were introverted.
I was an introvert. Um, and what I started noticing was that I was seeking opportunities now to be able to dance with the possibility of how we can co-create and create spaces of community of practice, to ensure that it's not me because I hold the position of diversity equity coordinator or advisor, but it's how do I support our system leaders to be able to do that work. It's been a slug, but these tools have really helped me, and I really enjoy utilizing them to be able to make that happen. One of the things I do, for example, currently with my team, I have a group of employees who work with me, about 35 of them, and we meet on a monthly basis. And we clear before each space, each meeting. And what continues to amaze people is how much we get done. It may take us an hour to clear, but the last hour, how much we're able to achieve is phenomenal. And so, they take a minute to clear themselves to be present. And it's just absolutely amazing what we get done and how we actually go deep in terms of being able to identify issues and to find possible solutions for them as we do this work. So those are just a couple of examples.
As you say that, I'm reminded of how many times I've seen uh, things not move forward, or organizations. I'm a management consultant in my own life, right? I'm working primarily now with nonprofit organizations, sometimes with government agencies and departments. And how many times an organization will seek to, or a group or a team will seek to move forward on top of junk, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's the junk that's here, and
Mm-hmm.
the organization or the team or the group is wanting to move forward without acknowledging the junk. Like, let's just put on top of the junk, let's add another layer to the junk,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
without actually being willing to lift up the hood, take a look under there, and see what's really going on underneath. But
Mm-hmm.
that conversation that you had about people being fearful, not feeling like they're enough, being apprehensive, having that being timid and not wanting to look under the surface,
Right.
not wanting to being fearful of looking under the surface. But when you do that and clear,
Mm-hmm.
uh, uh, once you have a clear space, being able to move forward with real speed becomes possible.
Oh, it's phenomenal. But one of the things, so sometimes I also align diversity, equity, and inclusion principles with change management strategies, because that's what you're actually doing. You're shifting and changing the culture, really. Um, and it's never a straight road. I mean, it's you go up and down, up and down, up and down. I mean, and you have one administration changes, things change. So it's a constant change that you're navigating as well. And if you follow most change management cycles, I mean, the space that your default and your starting space is really your comfort zone, whether it's beliefs or values that you have or hold, that you've been conditioned in, you've been using it for, umpteen years of your life. It has worked for you. It's kept you safe in whatever capacity safety is for you. But when again you start aligning using these distinctions for myself to clear myself and to hear, because the moment you step out of your comfort zone, you're into the fear zone, because you're in the unknown, and the unknown is scary. So part of what I do is to support folks to move from the unknown being a scary space to it being a space of curiosity especially when I do one-on-one training with senior members, because
So
that
do you
sense
have,
of getting them to be comfortable and to be moved from a space that is, to save face, all of that, to be really about curiosity. Like, what aspect of this work are you most fearful about? What aspect of this work would really be significant for you to shift and change, to move how the particular priorities you have on your table, on your plate, such that it can actually serve the full diversity of our student population. When we make it to those two steps and then they step into a learning space, that learning zone next, it's amazing what you can see shift and change. And
are there particular distinctions that you use more, or favorite distinctions that you use in this work? Summit distinctions?
clearing is a solid one, because I do say the word clearing. I said, I'm offering you a clearing space so that we can see what's there for you. Noticing is another one that I invite them to notice what's there for them. Um, Bumping up against, I use sometimes in terms of when change is not happening or shifts are not taking place, particularly when there's an urgent matter at hand, and there's some seeming resistance there. Um, Listening, authentic listening is one, because I think one of the most amazing thing about the tools that we've generated, I mean, we're so bloody brilliant sometimes. I wonder if we recognize how bloody brilliant we are in this conversation.
The
But
conversation is
authentic
brilliant for sure.
listening, where we're listening without judgment, we're listening for that space for people to, I'm listening for the access points, for people to feel heard, for people to feel as though I'm not judging them for whatever their beliefs or values are, but I can speak to the accountabilities that would shift how they do their work better. And I can speak to it from a human rights perspective in terms of what that means, in terms of um, the accountabilities that would put the organization at risk, and that it would be their accountability. It shifts the conversation slightly.
Mm.
So
Do
it's
you use
really
vision
deep
at all?
listening. Hmm?
Do you use vision at all?
I use vision, yes. I've been using that more with the systemic moves, because I'm actually in the process of designing and creating a whole way of supporting system leaders to think through equity. But so it's not a one-off, because one of the things that COVID did, COVID has shifted the dynamics of diversity, equity, and inclusion in two ways. On one hand, it has exposed all the inequities. And so equity is no longer on the margins. It has to be from the center. And some people resist that because, hey, that's a natural part. It's the comfort zone thing. And then it also exposed the fear factors to another level, where it's the detractors from who are fearful of change, seeing everything that is changing around them to be an invasion of every race, every religion, all of those things. So now you have persons who before, who may not have thought that they could do equity and inclusion, feeling more fearful or wanting to go back into their comfort zone, but recognizing they cannot do that, because if they're not really putting an equity lens to their work, they're actually being more of a disservice. So folks are in somewhat of a quandary in some ways, but it is what we're finding that we're doing now is developing tools to be able to support folks to be able to do that more effectively. And those tools may be protocols, those tools may be, training designed in a different way. So but all of these technology that I've learned in the summit have just been instrumental in shifting my listening, how I listen to people, and how we can move situations forward.
So let me ask you, thank you for that. Let me ask you about this year's annual summit event. So, as we have every year since 1991, we're going to have an annual summit event. And it's the first full weekend in August every single year.
Mhm.
And for those who are listening, and if you're interested in joining us, we're having our annual summit event. The last couple of years, it's been virtual on Zoom because of the pandemic. But this year, we're coming back in person again, and we're having a hybrid event, a 3-in-1 event with 2 physical locations plus virtual, all operating together as one event. Right. So we're having the Antigua location, the
Mhm.
Buffalo, New York location, and the Zoom virtual location, all operating together as one event the first full weekend in August. So, um, so we have an inquiry that we're looking at
Mhm.
leading into this year's annual summit event. How
Mhm.
has your engagement been with this year's inquiry?
Ooh, that is just knocking me upside down in 10 ways. And I love it. Um, I don't think it's ironic that the first year, again, that it was that question around consciously owning all that I create. This year's question, declaration, inquiry, as I embrace, oh, I was about to repeat another one. It's the I amness conversation at the end for me. Um, sorry, I've just lost track of the question of the deck.
I can get it in a moment, but what's
Yeah,
your experience been?
my experience with it has been getting present to what I say after I am more so than ever before. So one of the things I used to say, for example, is I'm tired. I try not to say that anymore. I say I feel tired
Mm.
because again, I am is another way for me to hold declaration. And so it is inviting me to be present in a way that I've never been present before. I have done some work on I am statements in the past, but I had a very long list of I am statements. This particular query, as I become present to I am, what is it to rest in the I amness? Thanks, Glenn. It's getting that rest in the I amness is really doing a number on me. It's not just to get the I am, but to rest in it, to trust it, to surrender to it. Um, that is just, oh my goodness. So the farthest I've gotten so far is, I am grateful, I am kind, I am love, I am joy, I am peace. To rest in that and to trust that. And there are all kinds of other things, but I really am inching through it in a way that really honors the essence of what is being revealed for me. And so I want to, it's being intentional for me to be very intentional to speak what is I am for me.
I got it. Thank you. You know, and so going into this year, have you decided which location you're going to be at this
I'll
year?
be in Buffalo.
Oh, you'll be in Buffalo. Okay.
Mhm.
Close, not far from, I'm in Toronto. So some Torontonians think of Buffalo like a suburb of Toronto.
Right. I'm passing through Toronto, Hamilton,
You fly out
Buffalo.
of the Buffalo airport like it's a
Yeah, I mean, growing up in Hamilton is just, down the road. So,
right, right, right. So, what are you hoping for yourself out of this year's annual summit event?
wow. Um, leading up to the summit, I've been really listening for new creations in my life, and new spaces to explore. So I'm listening for how the I am statements are going to be a critical driving force for whatever I do, or who I'm becoming, let's say, and how those I am statements are driving me through that process. So I'm just really looking to be anchored more into that and to really learn from other folks in terms of what their I am journey has been. Um, and I mean, part of the unpredictable of the conversation of the summit is that you just don't know what gems you're going to get or what's going to crack you open. And so I look forward to the surprise of whatever that is. And at the same time, I'm just looking to share and to be present to what this rest in the I amness will give me access to, and a
You know,
deeper
it's
cut.
interesting. A deeper cut. You know, it's interesting because one of the things I like about this year's inquiry and the I am statement is, for me, I really relate to that I am statement, looking at this inquiry from through the lens of the power of language
Hmm.
and the power of declaring our identity and who we
Absolutely,
are. And
absolutely.
so as we speak I ams that
Hmm.
are empowering, like you did, I am love, I am peace, I am brilliant, I am, you know what I mean? Like, as we speak that, as we declare that, as we live into that
Hmm.
as a foundational identity, as
Yeah,
opposed to what we, many of us anyway, and I know I have done this, speaking negative things completely unconscious. You
absolutely.
know what I mean? Oh, I'm such a bozo. I made another
Hmm.
mistake. I'm so slow. Oh,
Hmm.
I'm so, you know what I mean? And
Yeah,
speaking those things,
exactly.
giving that disempowerment energy, as
Hmm.
opposed to speaking things that are empowering and giving that energy and expanding that in who we are and in our world. So I just,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And that's what I was finding when I was saying things like, I am tired. I am, I'm so this, 'cause I was draining myself. That's one of the things I've noticed. And so that's why, as I said, I'm being intentional as to what I do put after the I am. And I want it to be a small list now, because you just said the key word. I think one of the things, again, coming out of, the twin pandemics of COVID and anti-Black racism and all its manifestations has really issued an invitation for us to reimagine or recreate our lives in different ways. And so I almost feel, when you ask me the question about the I am statements, I I believe for myself, let me speak for myself, that this is actually laying the foundation for the next reiteration of my life. That's how significant this year's question is for me. It is giving me a, it's like the I am is giving me the blueprint for the rest of my life. And so that's the intentionality for me in terms of what is going to be my foundation moving forward. Because it is, the time is now. The time is now. So, and I think it's just an exciting time to be a person of Black African descent and to be in this conversation and to have these tools such that we can create our lives in ways like never before.
Yes, absolutely. I keep talking about the Wakanda of the diaspora,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Like we can create a
Absolutely.
diasporic Wakanda. Like Wakanda doesn't have to just be this one imaginary
It's
place
not
on the
mythical. It's
continent.
real, baby. It's real.
We can actually have it be real in the world
It is.
throughout the
It
diaspora.
is.
Absolutely, it
Oh
is.
my goodness.
So
That's
I
what
do want to
excites me
take
about this conversation, because I do think, like, I've seen this conversation heal. I've used this conversation to be part of my healing journey when I went through some health challenges. I've used those tools to clear myself, to prepare myself for surgery, and to support me after that. I've seen, when we were in Ferguson, how the just presencing the declaration started a healing journey for some of the folks, even if they
Mm,
never stepped foot into the summit space itself. There is
mm,
something about the work we do that is healing, empowering. It excites me because it really has
mm.
given life to my life in so many ways. And these tools are no joke. Once you use them, it's just absolutely magnificent how um, they have transformed my life. That's all I can say. They have transformed my
Yeah,
life.
absolutely. Same for me. Absolutely true for me too. True for me too. I want to go back to when you joined the facilitator body.
Mm.
What why did you know you're a facilitator now, you're an active facilitator, you have been for
Hmm.
years, you're going to be one of the facilitators at this year's annual summit event. what had you choose to become a member of the facilitator body
Mm.
and to go through that training? And when did you do that?
I stepped up to be a facilitator in Birmingham. What year was that? Birmingham. I the facilitators that I had the pleasure of guiding me or holding space for me to discover and continue to discover different aspects of myself. I was just blown away by their authenticity, their generosity, and their mastery of the tools and the distinctions, the tools including our distinctions, and their ability to listen. And one of the things that I was really taken aback by was they were just not listening to words, they were listening to spaces, they were listening to things that are not being said. And that is a critical skill set. And so I wanted to learn from them. I wanted to learn from the OGs. I wanted to learn from the senior facilitators at the time. And I wanted to really listen for how I see them applying it to their lives, but also in different facets, whether it's their own careers or so on. So I wanted to really develop mastery of the tools, because just within the short space of time that I was, testing my waters with them, I was noticing shifts happening in my life. And I wanted to know what would happen if I actually immerse myself into this and to be able to gain the facility to be able to do what they were doing, and to find my own, to continue to strengthen my own voice. And so that's what the first couple of years I was just there to be support, etc. But then as it got to a point, I was just like, you know what? The deeper I go into this, the more I would gain my own I'd strengthen my own internal fortitude. And that's what I did. And it's been instrumental in that for me.
I got it. I got it. Okay. So, before we complete, I just have a couple of final questions for you.
Mhm.
One, do you have a favorite annual summit event?
Do I have a favorite what?
Annual summit event.
Oh my goodness. That's like asking me if I have a favorite child. Come on. uh, I will answer that by saying the summit that I had big leaps. The first summit for sure in Memphis. That I would say the next major big leap was, and I should say, before I joined the facilitated body, I joined what was then known as the coordinating committee. So I started inching my way through before I got to the facilitator body. And I think working on the coordinating committee for Toronto was instrumental in me getting to know other people and starting to build capacity in a different way with the tools. Brazil was significant. Brazil, and then back to Brazil and Ghana. It was like twin summits for me in terms of the energy that was created and the, culminating into that I am enough declaration. And then I would say Ferguson, because of the call into a space that was calling for support and healing. And I remember one of the gentlemen who came the Friday night said, we were the first group that came into Ferguson that didn't tell them what to do, but was really listening to them in terms of what they needed as individuals and as a community. And so I thought that was really quite powerful. And I don't know, Jackie. Those are the
I think
ones that
that's
I can
good. That
say.
answers my
But ever
question. That
since the
answers my
summit has
question.
taken me through different parts of myself. So, but those are I would say those are the big milestone ones.
Mm. You know, it's interesting. I think Memphis is the annual summit event where where the hotel where I walked in on you in the hotel room. Was it Memphis?
We've had a
Because we
couple
both
of
had the same
encounters.
name. We both had the same name. So, you know, I'll just mention this. I had heard your name multiple times before I ever met you. Living in
Mhm.
Toronto, you living in Ottawa,
I
I would
know,
have people come
same.
up to me and say, "You're the Jacqueline Lawrence who works with so and so in Ottawa, right?" And I'd be like, "No, that is that is not that is not me." I
And
had
I would
people
get,
say,
"You're
"I'm
Jacqueline
so
Lawrence from Toronto, the lawyer." And I'm like, There's another Jacqueline Lawrence."
so
But
for
we've
us to
had
finally
encounters in
meet in the summit."
Baltimore and going to Brazil. I think we had some airport thing like, "Oh, Miss Lawrence, you've already checked in."
Yeah, I walked in on you sleeping in your hotel room
Oh, wow.
because they
I don't
thought I
remember
was
that
you, so
one.
they gave me a key to your room. I
Oh,
mean,
wow. Oh,
yeah.
wow. Oh, wow. Uh,
I
I tell
tiptoed
you,
out. I tiptoed
that's been
out.
a trip in and of itself.
Well, Jacqueline, well, you know, I also have to say sometimes the things that you do, I claim. I'm like, yeah, that's another part of me. That's another part of me getting all of that done.
Oh, wow. Not a problem.
So thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I'm
Thank
going to
you.
ask you one final question.
Mm-hmm.
If you had one wish for the world right now, what would that be?
Ooh. I'll do like my Miss Universe world peace. No,
There's nothing wrong with world peace, is it?
no, nothing wrong with that at all. I would say though, my biggest wish for the world is that um, people are heard, valued, and know their worth,
Mm,
um, and are fully able to maximize their potential because their gift, we're waiting for them to gift us what they
mm,
have been sent here to deliver. Um, and I think this is why tools like the International Black Summit frees people up to be able to do that by accessing their vision and to be able to deliver that gift to the world. And I think that's how we're going to get out of this thing
mm.
together.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Well,
Mhm.
tonight we listened to you and we honor you. So thank you so much for being who you are and for bringing everything that you bring to this conversation and to my life and to the world.
Well, thank you, Miss Grace Lawrence. It's been
Love
a
you,
pleasure journeying
Jacqueline.
with you.
Mwah. Good
Good
night,
night.
everybody. Mwah to you too. Thank you all for being with us tonight. Thank you for joining us. We love that you come and join us when we have these conversations, and we would love for you to come and to join us at the annual summit event. So, if it's calling you, if it's tugging at your gut or your heartstrings, and you just want to find out more, come check us out and be with us. Have a great night, everybody. We just said good night, but for those of you who decided to hang on, we have a special bonus for you. Jacqueline Lawrence, Jake, is also passionate about poetry and is a poet. So she's agreed to share one of her poems with us right now. Enjoy.
Thanks, Grace. This is a piece that I wrote about 8 to 9 months after um, the Ghana summit, and it's called Voices. I sat in the center of the dark cell, its closed black iron cast door shutting out the midday sun. I sat on the cold dirt floor where freedom fighters fell one by one. Silence fed me memories. No room, no light, no oxygen. Only death lived in the skull-marked room. And the voices echoed, "Forgive them, forgive them, forgive them." I walked outside to the main courtyard as the sun-baked tear-stained tracks on my cheeks, my eyes fastened on the church in the corner, its steeple reaching up to heaven and its foundation cemented in the dungeon's rooftop. It is a silent witness to chained humans waiting below in knee-deep wastes, fishing for food and inching through narrow, now whitewashed corridors, and the voices echoed, "Forgive them, forgive them, forgive them." Unsteady feet took me up the stairs to the second level courtyard where my sisters, my aunties, and my girl cousins were paraded for the Portuguese, Spanish, and British officers. The lottery picks to be bedded for one night or more by one officer or more. No white knights to the rescue, no ministers or ministries lobbying against the sowing of unwelcome seeds in the wounds of many. And the voices echoed, "Forgive them, forgive them, forgive them." I shifted my feet towards the gate of no return. My heart pace quickened, matching the pounding of the Atlantic on the other side. My knees buckled as I slowly retraced the footsteps of hundreds of thousands, the footprints of millions. The gate opened and silence fed me memories, strangers with guns and no amazing grace, lashing the captured with whips and foreign tongues, corralling them into wave-tossed rocking boats, packing them as sardines in ocean-bound ships, transporting them as cargo afar and away from home. And the voices echoed, "Forgive them, forgive them, forgive them." In the hazy horizon, I saw the ships disappear, falling into the new world. I saw ocean waters rising up like arms, cradling bruised, lifeless bodies, hurled overboard to swim home, to stay home. And the voices echoed, "Remember me, remember me, remember me." I slowly walked back through the gate of return and stood beside the Empress and Afua, not knowing for how many I stood. Silence fed me gratitude. I whispered, "Thank you." And the voices replied, "I am at rest. I am at rest. I am at rest." So that is a piece that was written after Ghana. And I was sharing with folks that what was so significant about that piece was while I was in Ghana, I couldn't write. My notebook came back empty because Ghana demanded all of my senses to be able to just capture the images and the experience of that trip. And specifically getting that declaration, "I am enough," certainly spearheaded me to continue. And the writing is certainly a part of that, where I think I became more fully self-expressed and willing to share, and having had the opportunity to be published in 3 anthologies and getting ready to do my first full feature collection coming out either the end of this year or early next year. So really excited about that.
Thank you so much. We just said good night, but for those of you who decided to hang on, we have a special bonus for you. Jacqueline Lawrence, Jake, is also passionate about poetry and is a poet. So she's agreed to share one of her poems with us right now. Enjoy.
Thanks, Grace. This is a piece that I wrote about 8 to 9 months after the Ghana summit, and it's called Voices. I sat in the center of the dark cell, its closed black iron cast door shutting out the midday sun. I sat on the cold dirt floor where freedom fighters fell one by one. Silence fed me memories. No room, no light, no oxygen. Only death lived in the skull-marked room. And the voices echoed, "Forgive them, forgive them, forgive them." I walked outside to the main courtyard as the sun-baked tear-stained tracks on my cheeks, my eyes fastened on the church in the corner, its steeple reaching up to heaven and its foundation cemented in the dungeon's rooftop. It is a silent witness to chained humans waiting below in knee-deep wastes, fishing for food and inching through narrow, now whitewashed corridors, and the voices echoed, "Forgive them, forgive them, forgive them." Unsteady feet took me up the stairs to the second level courtyard where my sisters, my aunties, and my girl cousins were paraded for the Portuguese, Spanish, and British officers. The lottery picks to be bedded for one night or more by one officer or more. No white knights to the rescue, no ministers or ministries lobbying against the sowing of unwelcome seeds in the wounds of many. And the voices echoed, "Forgive them, forgive them, forgive them." I shifted my feet towards the gate of no return, my heart pace quickened, matching the pounding of the Atlantic on the other side. My knees buckled as I slowly retraced the footsteps of hundreds of thousands, the footprints of millions. The gate opened and silence fed me memories, strangers with guns and no amazing grace, lashing the captured with whips and foreign tongues, corralling them into wave-tossed rocking boats, packing them as sardines in ocean-bound ships, transporting them as cargo afar and away from home. And the voices echoed, "Forgive them, forgive them, forgive them." In the hazy horizon, I saw the ships disappear, falling into the new world. I saw ocean waters rising up like arms, cradling bruised, lifeless bodies, hurled overboard to swim home, to stay home. And the voices echoed, "Remember me, remember me, remember me." I slowly walked back through the gate of return and stood beside the Empress and Afua, not knowing for how many I stood. Silence fed me gratitude. I whispered, "Thank you." And the voices replied, "I am at rest. I am at rest. I am at rest." So that is a piece that was written after Ghana. And I was sharing with folks that what was so significant about that piece was while I was in Ghana, I couldn't write. My notebook came back empty because Ghana demanded all of my senses to be able to just capture the images and the experience of that trip. And specifically getting that declaration, "I am enough," certainly spearheaded me to continue. And the writing is certainly a part of that, where I think I became more fully self-expressed and willing to share, and having had the opportunity to be published in 3 anthologies and getting ready to do my first full feature collection coming out either the end of this year or early next year. So really excited about that.
Thank you so much.